So I've titled it From Thought into Motion, Helping Get Business Done While Educating. And I'm going to do a couple of things. I'm going to share a couple more inspirational words. I'm going to ask the question and maybe discuss a little bit, why are we here, on both a large scale and a small scale. I'm going to explore a couple of scenarios. I'm going to talk about the chair as wise craftsperson, the craftsperson of motions. Talk about many ways to help. I'm going to talk a little bit about withdrawing the question and then a wrap up. So I like this quote from Gandhi. It says, your beliefs become your thoughts become your words become your actions become your habits become your values, and your values become your destiny. I don't think about my destiny very often, but when I read this, I think it's important. So why are we here? Why is the NAP here? Why is the ASAP here and other associations? Why is our unit here? Why are we here? Here's a question for you. As the NAP mission statement, NAP is a society dedicated to, anybody know what the next word in that mission statement is? Some head shaking. Educating leaders throughout the world in effective meeting management through the use of parliamentary procedure. And I would just kind of boil that down to our mission really is educating others in parliamentary procedures. So that's what the association is for, and that to me is what our part is in the association. The vision statement says to provide parliamentary leadership in the world, and I think to myself, is that leaders that use parliamentary procedures? No, I think it's our goal is to lead the world in showing others how to use parliamentary procedures effectively. Now, that educational process can happen at a number of levels, and if you just think about school in general, we have early education at home and sort of the conceptual familiarity. You learn how to walk, you learn about some words and syllables, and you learn how to stick a spoon in a bowl of cereal and do that sort of stuff. But that's done very early. Very late in your education, you get these advanced credentials, and somewhere in the middle, you develop between that just conceptual familiarity and the advanced credentials. And from a parliamentarian's point of view, I sort of came up with this phrase a couple of months ago of parliamentary literacy. The real issue that I think that we have is that we have some nice training materials that we hand out to people, and we do a very good job of educating ourselves. But what I really hope that we can do both individually and as part of ASAP and the Our FRIA unit and NAP is to help advance the state of parliamentary literacy outside of our organization. Here's the thing I referred to earlier in the meeting, two sides of the parliamentary coin. Now, there's parliamentarians that use parliamentary process to get things done, and there's parliamentarians that use the parliamentary process really to get in the way of progress. And what I think we ought to be doing is making sure that we are doing what we can to get things done. There's an appropriate time to get in the way of progress, but doing it properly. A couple of facts here real quick, and they're not really facts, they're really approximations. So there's less than 100 members of ASAP. And if you add in people in the state of Arizona who belong to AIP, but not ASAP, still probably maybe, let's just say 100 people. And some of them are on HOA boards, some of them are not, but let's just say for a moment that there's 100 people in Arizona who really know their stuff in terms of parliamentary process that are on HOA boards. A couple of years ago, I got the download from the Arizona Corporation Commission. There were a little over 9,000, like 9,300 HOAs in Arizona, and I'm guessing there's close to 10,000 HOAs in Arizona right now, which if you take those numbers, it means 99 out of 100 HOAs don't even have a director with any parliamentary education or background. In most organizations, HOAs and others a member with parliamentary education really is the only person so equipped in the meeting. If you're in a small group, you are probably the only person with parliamentary training. And for me, this is the perfect environment to help educate others, both in HOAs and in other small organizations. So the dilemma then is, how do we do that? How do we both manage the meeting and make the business move forward, and also take the opportunity to train people? And that's what I'm really going to talk about here, is some opportunities for that. So the situation I'm thinking of is, you're the chairperson at a meeting and everybody's well behaved. We've all been at meetings where people aren't well behaved, but people are well behaved at most meetings. And you're really the only person with the parliamentary training. After the conclusion of some other item of business, some person kind of, half raises their hand and says, it looks to me like the flowers in the entrance to our community have shriveled up and died. Can we get them replaced? Well, how do you respond to that? There's a couple of ways of doing that. Number one is out of order. You didn't ask to be recognized first. So the rationale there is, someone's mind is that, we adopted Robert's rules, follow the rules, do it right. Though we know that in general and small board procedures, members can raise a hand instead of standing, and there are a number of things that we do. And especially in the Zoom world, there's no raising of hand necessarily, but people should ask to be recognized in general. But as long as no one else is speaking, if one person kind of speaks, chimes in, that's okay in my book, in most small instances. Kind of the second response is, well, is that a request for information? Maybe you should read up on your Robert's Rules of Order next time. There's a proper way to make a request for information, but the reality is you've got a member with a question and it's concise and not argumentative. As the chair, I think we ought to do what we can to help out. Here's the response number 3 that I kind of like. The chair would probably say something like, it sounds like you'd be in favor of doing the replacement of those flowers. Would you like some help rephrasing your question in the form of a motion so that we can discuss it and make a decision? So there you've kind of embodied a lot of things that I'm going to talk about here. You've allowed them to speak briefly before making a motion, and you've offered to help them in the process of making a motion. That bottom bullet down there, it's the chair's responsibility to facilitate business. The object of rules of order is to facilitate the smooth functioning of the assembly. And in smaller organizations, we don't lean so much on the letter of the law as long as we get business done very often. How far can the speaker go? Well, Robert's Rules tells us when necessary, a motion can be prefaced by a few words of explanation, which must not become a speech. Let's say the guy says, the flowers in the entrance have looked horrible for weeks in spite of the landscaper's attempts to revitalize them. So I move that, and then he supplies a motion. Usually, if you've got some people who've had some parliamentary training, you'll at least get that far. But in some of the meetings that I'm in where nobody knows anything other than the phrase is Robert's Rules, but after that, I don't know anything. A member can first request information then. Has anyone else noticed the flower beds in the entrance and how most of them are dead and lifeless? That's sort of a request for information. It may not be the type of request for information that Robert's Rules is really asking, but at that point, they are introducing a subject that can then become a brief discussion. Or he can briefly say that what he wishes to propose and ask the chair to ask him in wording an appropriate motion. Help me out here, but how do we go about getting the landscaper to replant the flower bed at the entrance? Is a great lead in to the chair, I think, to, well, I'll help you craft a motion. What is it you would like to say? So another thing that RONR tells us in general, while a member has to obtain the floor with no motion pending, unless it's for a special purpose, he makes a motion immediately. We know that in small meetings, we use those opportunities, I think, more to learn about the parliamentary process. Again, Robert's Rules says unless the assembly has specifically authorized a particular subject, got to get my mouth work done. that a particular subject be discussed while no motion is pending. Such a discussion can be entered into only at the sufferance of the chair or until a point of order is made. Sufferance. The only time I've ever used the word like sufferance is in the biblical thing about suffer the little children to come unto me. Well, I had to go look that up at one point. It's kind of like tolerating. You can tolerate so much, but know where you need to then kind of cut them off. Any member can say, point of order, no motion is on the floor and this discussion appears out of order, or simply point of order, is there a motion? And the chair could reply, if there's no objection, I'll allow another minute of preparatory text provided the speaker's preparing to submit a motion. So there you've kind of put the speaker on notice that I'm expecting a motion out of you, and if you're not going to make a motion, shut up now. You're being nice about it. But if you're not going to make a motion, we're done. But if you are going to make a motion, get to it soon. And if you need some help, sometimes you might add in there, and I can help you phrase the motion. Especially if you've done this a lot, where your members are accustomed to having your assistance in the phrasing of the motion. You don't put your influence in the motion, but you do help them in the crafting of the motion. This is where I talk about the chair sort of as motion craftsperson. RONR says that a member makes a motion immediately, but can preface it with a brief explanation or ask the chair for assistance. Why not, as a chair, would you not presume that the member with limited parliamentary training is attempting to make a motion and offer or provide assistance? They probably don't even know they can ask you for assistance, so that they don't ask. They would rather stumble around and go, well, I move, I so move, they'll fumble rather than saying, would you help me craft a motion? And so what I like to do very often, especially in the Zoom days, is I like to kind of go along with them here as they say, well, okay, what I want to do is I want to make a motion to replace the flowers in the entrance to the building. No, the entrance to the community. And not all of the flowers, just the flowers in the flower bed. And so I very often will kind of type this in as they're going. I'm using their words. I think we ought to get a proposal from the landscaper, not just do it, but we need to get a proposal from them first. And, rather than waiting until next month, I think we probably ought to authorize the president to approve the proposal, but not for any amount of money. I think maybe, let's say $750 is probably the most that I think we ought to do. And, I think we probably ought to take it out of the repair and maintenance funds for landscape, just to make sure that we're taking it out of the right part of the budget and everything. And so I do this very often with my board to, a motion that hasn't been well thought out in advance, and actually kind of type this on the fly, and we make the changes. And then I say, Andre, is that the motion you want to make? And he goes, yeah, that's the motion I want to make. So do I make somebody read this before the chair reads it? No, because Robert's Rules of Order says that you can force, I'll use the word force, I don't think the word force is in the Robert's Rules, but you can require a maker of a motion to submit it in writing. And in essence, what we have here is a motion submitted in writing. And so then I think I, as chair, if I ask Andre, is this the motion you want to make? He says, yes. Mr. Gage, you have a hand raised.
Yes, I do, sir. I think if you're going to teach them, you should teach them right. And I make a motion is what you do in a parade. When you do a parade,
yes.
Okay. It should be I move to get a proposal.
Correct. I typed way too quickly on this when I was doing it. And
I'm not being critical because I feel you. I understand completely. So,
I hate to say that some of the minutes that I've seen is that someone made a movement, and that's something entirely different.
That's not acceptable at all.
No. Oh my. So at any rate, this is what I do. And then I will read this basically as the chair restating it to basically then make it belong to the assembly as opposed to the mover of the question, mover of the motion, maker of the motion. So RONR has this section called Informal Consultation to assist the framing of the motion. That's the actual title of this section. Occasionally, brief informal consultation or discussion of a subject may assist a member in a framing of proper motion. If the chair permits such a discussion, he must not allow it to continue more than a few moments or longer than is reasonably necessary to arrive at a motion embodying the member's ideas. So a few moments or longer. How long is a moment? I don't know. My view of this is it takes however long it takes. And if it's something that's a little bit more complex, it may take a few extra minutes, but to get a motion then that is actionable, I would rather have a motion that is actionable. I will talk here in a little bit about making a motion that is kind of started and then toss it over to a committee to refine. I think this time is time well spent in helping out the process. And so procedures by which proposal contained in a motion can be approved upon before action is taken is this RONR 1029. And my paraphrasing of this really is, start with a motion even if it's just simple, incomplete, or even somehow flawed. And after the main motion is made, but before the question has been, I say restated by the chair, but stated by the chair, any member can informally suggest one or more modifications which the maker can accept or reject as desired. I like to make sure that the people who are making suggestions, I try to guide the discussion so that they go, no, we're not really talking about donating money to the boys club. What we're talking about is putting steps on the front of the building. Now that's two whole different topics. And I really don't, I try not to let them do that if at all possible. The other thing that I think is very important at this point is then to be able to suggest to them things that help them not get stuck, like filling in the blanks later. If they said, $750 max, and someone else goes, no, I think it ought to be like 850, and someone else goes, no, $500 is too much. That's the point where you as the chair, before it has gotten to the assembly, say, why don't we just insert a blank there and we'll hash it out as part of the formal amendment process. And that's the way I try and do that. It doesn't always work out that way. So I titled this slide, Commit to the Motion or Commit the Motion. You either do proper recasting of the main motion, which might take some time. You may be able to do it very quickly, but if it takes a long time, then I would say, well, let's toss this over to a committee. A motion with any degree of importance or consequence, in my view, ought to be sent to a committee anyway. And we know that there are legislatures and other organizations that say, everything has to go through some sort of committee before it actually comes to the assembly. If there's time, and I don't know about your meetings, but my meetings always run long. But if there's time and if groupthink is appropriate, I think considering committee of the whole. I've never done this before, but it's always in the back of my mind. Well, let's get informal now. Let's go into a committee of the whole. We've got some extra time. Let's take 10 minutes and sort of hash this out where you don't quite have the formalities of the assembly process, and then report back with a much more refined motion when you're done. And that I think, like I said, I've never actually done this, but I think that would work well if you have the time to do so. So what happens if you've got no commit and no commitment? You haven't sent it off to a committee, and you no one really does support the motion sort of the way it is. RONR says a member speaking in debate can urge rejection of the pending main motion, saying that if it is voted down, he will offer a different main motion, which he can describe briefly and which deals with the general problem in a substantially different way. And so you can help guide this. Very often, someone will go, oh gosh, this is so difficult. Why don't we just say this and everyone will kind of agree? And the reality is, I think we need to find a way to make that happen, but also use the appropriate process to do that. The other part of RONR 1030 is the last point there is if there's a move to postpone the main motion indefinitely, or if there's a quick vote and that motion is voted down, the chair immediately recognizes the member again for the purpose of making his alternative motion, even if another member rises to claim the floor first and addresses the chair. So if the motion is set to be postponed indefinitely, and the guy who made the original motion says, but Mr. Chair, no, I'm sorry, Frank has the floor because Frank proposed an alternative motion and he has the floor. Whose motion is it anyway? It took me a while to learn this. I've understood it now for a couple of years, but it took me a while to kind of understand whose motion is it anyway. I don't know if you used to watch the TV show, the comedy show, Whose Line Is It Anyway? Anyway, that's where I got that from. Request for permission to withdraw or modify a motion after it has been stated by the chair. So before a motion has been stated by the chair, it's the property of the mover who can withdraw or modify it without asking consent of anyone. So, oh, that was a stupid idea. I withdraw my motion. It's not been repeated by the chair, but after it's been stated by the chair, it belongs to the assembly or the meeting as a whole, and withdrawal or modification requires permission of the assembly, which the chair usually initially treats with a unanimous consent request. I'm trying to think of scenarios where someone says, no, you can't withdraw that motion. I like it too much. And if there's an objection to it being withdrawn, then you take it through to its logical conclusion. The chair speaks, Madam President, I ask permission to withdraw the motion. And unless there's an objection, the motion's withdrawn. But if there is an objection, the chair can put the question about the withdrawal, or a member can move that permission to withdraw the motion be granted. So if there's not an immediate motion, the chair can actually just put that question. Let's take a vote then on whether we're going to allow the question to be withdrawn. Let's see here. A request to withdraw a motion can be made anytime before voting on the question has been begun, even though the motion has been amended and even though subsidiary or incidental motions may be pending. So one of the things I've said before in one of my meetings is, if it's a bad motion, we ought to just kill it. There's no reason to let a bad motion continue forward. But once you've started voting, and I know in a small group, it's normally a show of hands, but if you're going to have a large group and you're doing polling or whatever, once you've started that, it's going to be voted on. But if the main motion's allowed to be withdrawn, any motions adhering to that cease to be before the assembly. It sort of makes sense to me. But what if my motion is withdrawn, but there was a motion before I asked to withdraw it to actually send it to committee? Well, if the motion's been withdrawn, there's no reason to send it to committee now, is there? So we can just dispense with everything that attached to the main motion if the assembly gives permission for the motion to be withdrawn. I don't know, I get a lot of stuff from music. Get by with a little help from my friends. Any member can suggest that the maker of a motion ask to withdraw it, which the maker can do or decline to do as he chooses. Didn't actually put the RONR reference on there, but someone can go, John, that was a stupid motion. We shouldn't be even thinking about it now. And John can just go, well, that's just too darn bad. Or he can go, hey, gosh, you're right. Gosh, now I understand why it's stupid. We can kind of take that out. So another approach then, and again, I use all of these really as an ability to sort of train people in how Robert's rules allow us to do things, but maybe we've got a question that's better considered in two parts. let's first consider whether we're even going to get a proposal and do the stuff in the flower bed, and maybe as we've had the discussion, whether the president should go ahead and approve that or not seems to be contentious, but everyone seems to want to go ahead and do the stuff in the flower bed. We can break those into two separate pieces and consider them separately. After, let's see here, one or more parts can be withdrawn without affecting the other parts. That's not necessarily always the case. If you withdraw the part about even doing the front part, then whether or not to authorize the president seems to be moot at that point. And here's the other thing that I kind of knew, but until I actually read this sentence, it wasn't gelled in my head, that after a motion has been withdrawn, the situation is as though it had never been made. Therefore, the same motion can be made again at the same meeting. So if you've withdrawn a motion, the prohibition against making a motion on the same topic does not apply, because the withdrawn motion is as if it was never made. So that, to me, I sort of understood that before, but until I read that, I was like, oh yeah, that really is the way it is. I put this title here, Can't We All Just Be Friends? RONR has the section on friendly amendments used to describe an amendment offered to improve a motion. Regardless of whether or not the maker of the main motion accepts the amendment, it has to be open to debate and voted on formally. This is after the question has been stated by the chair. So, that amendment offered to improve the motion really is, in my view, it's a motion at that point. And either we're going to treat it as a motion, but we're not just going to make the change to the motion just because Fred said to John, hey John, instead of 750, let's make it 800. Okay. So that really sort of gets me through the whole presentation. I got 2 slides here kind of to summarize kind of my thoughts on all of this. Yeah, the chair ought to provide some assistance in crafting motions without exerting influence over the substantive content or intended effect. So I wouldn't, as the chair, necessarily say, oh, that's nice you made the motion to do that, but shouldn't the president be allowed to approve that rather than waiting to the next meeting? I would not offer that, but if someone else offered it, then I would help comprise the main motion with that. Before the chair states the motion for the assembly, allow some leeway to conversation about what the motion should be, but don't allow debate. Don't allow them to start arguing now about whether it should be 750 or 850 or 500. That's not the time for debate. We're trying to craft a motion here so that we can get into debate. When it's no longer friendly banter toward forward progress, state the motion and it exists and continue with the amendments formally. If things start to get heated and it's not quite debate, but it really is argument, yeah, okay, that's enough. I'm going to state the motion now, and we'll consider it formally. And sometimes it really is better to start over just by withdrawing the current state of the motion and substituting a new, perhaps better, well-crafted motion immediately. And so I like to think about these multiple paths that we can use to help guide motions. And again, in the same process, I think educating those in our smaller group about the way Robert's Rules allows us to do that. Allow some prefacing of motions, but don't let them go too far. And after a few meetings, they'll understand that you can do that, but you're not going to let them ramble on for hours. And I've got one member of my board who likes to be wordy, and I occasionally have to rein her in. You can assist the speaker in framing the motion if appropriate or asked for. So don't necessarily wait for them to ask for your help in framing the motion. You might offer, would you like some help in making that motion motionable? I don't know. There was a word I was looking for, I couldn't find it. Allow and encourage the informal adjustments to the motion before stating it to the assembly And I really kind of think of those as adjustments to the motion. They're not really amendments. No, let's change that 750 to 800, but inclusion of things that should be there. I like to be kind of quick to recommend using the fill in the blanks alternative. If appropriate, send it to a committee. Let them spend hours if they want to. So Frank, you were in favor of it. Susan, you were opposed to it. John, you were sort of middle of the road. I'd like to appoint the committee of you three to go out and hammer this out and come back when you've got something that all three of you can agree to. Allow for withdrawal and substitution, divided into parts with separate motions handled serially, and be careful with friendly amendments. Ask for a vote unless unanimous consent is readily obtained on any request to make changes. So that's, why are we here? Well, we're here to educate ourselves, but we're here to educate others as well. And I think whatever we can do during a meeting to help educate people who probably don't have much parliamentary training is a wonderful opportunity for us to do it in that sort of surreptitious way. I'm going to train you in Robert's Rules of Order here, but you're not going to know you're being trained. And very often that's the best learning, is they come out of it going, I learned some stuff about Robert's Rules of Order today and I didn't even know. All right, any questions or other discussion? Happy to hear, experience or whatever else you've done.
Ray, I'd just like to say, like the way you talked about withdrawing and starting over.
Yes.
Be careful not to use the word substitute, because that's a different meaning. Just withdraw and start over is the correct way. AIPSD has a motion for that called the Gordian knot, where you just get so confused you don't know where you're at and you start over. Withdrawing it, like you're talking about, is a much easier way to get there.
Right.
Could we just withdraw this motion and start over? Or somebody stands up in debate and says, I've crafted another motion and we're in a really complex situation right here. I can't offer this motion. If you would withdraw, I'll offer this motion, and that's the way you expedite business usually. So,
and what I've heard in that situation before is, well, I don't know if I want to withdraw my motion or not. What's different about your motion? And I'll permit, 30 seconds of discussion of, well, my motion includes the, all of the appointees to the committee and the blah, 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 blah. Oh, okay. So they at least get a sense of why it might be appropriate.
Right. The one thing that wasn't clear from your presentation is the only one that can initiate the withdrawal is the maker.
Yes. Yeah. So there was the one slide that other people can recommend that they do it, but they have to do it. So someone can't really recommend that.
They can ask.
They can ask, and he can either do it or not do it at his own discretion, but it's up to him to withdraw or not.
I had one group that had developed, they did not have that understanding, and their methodology to get previous question or to defeat a motion was to move to withdraw, and they were adopting that. Any member could make that motion, and then they were defeating the motion by a majority vote rather than
right.
And it wasn't debatable, right? So that's how they were getting previous question, lay on the table, and object to the consideration, all done at the same time,
right,
by a majority vote.
Right. The other thought that I had, and I had started to make a slide on it, and I kind of went, no, that's too complex, is your alternative to withdrawal or not, setting it aside and doing the reconsideration thing is to vote on the motion. If you're there at the point and you don't know whether you want to go back to the beginning or make or whatever, just call for the question and let's vote on it. And if it gets voted down, well, you can, I suppose, make a motion that is different than that motion. You couldn't certainly start with the same motion all over again. But yeah, withdrawal is the best way, because then you can kind of start afresh and hopefully get it right.
I have a stupid question.
Yes,
I
Dawn.
have one group that I work with, and I cannot get through to them that motion is not the way. Motion is a noun.
Yes. Yeah.
Any suggestions?
Until the millennials get a hold of it, then they'll have an app for it and it'll be called iMotion, you know?
Yeah, as I said earlier, as long as you don't say I'm going to make a movement, I think we're probably okay. But yeah, and I have had to do that with my group, and I think they are better about it. But every once in a while, they still go, and I motion. Well, okay, not quite, but close enough. Let me restate it.
I bet the old famous one, I so move.
I so move. Yes. Yeah, that's not not done here either.